Welcome back to Centennial Conversations, a series of podcasts about the first 100 years of Gavilan College. I'm Dana Young, one of your librarians here at Gavilan, and we're here once again with Leah Halper, who has recently written and updated a history of Gavilan College.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming and talking about your work. Last time we talked about San Benito Junior College coming into being as the First World War was ending, and students staying nearby to attend, having the opportunity to stay nearby to attend college instead of going to San Jose. How successful was the early San Benito Junior College?
It was a huge success, and that's in the context of this resounding success in general for junior colleges in California. By 1936, there were 42 public junior colleges in California. California took the lead, and it's never really given it back to anybody. We have the most. But enrollments routinely doubled in the 20s. The 20s were a prosperous period here and other places. And by 1930, there were 198 students in the college. It was big.
Wow. Who came to the college?
That's an interesting question. It has a lot of different answers. I think one answer that I need to give first is that amazingly, and this just blew me away when I was reading about it, the college had an excellent reputation during the 1920s, so excellent that a federal official at the Washington, D.C. Bureau of Education recommended it as one of the top junior colleges in the country. And so people from all over California came to San Benito Junior College. There were 10 students from San Fernando Valley. A principal at the high school there wrote and said, I have 10 students. Would you send them applications? And presumably they came. I mean, people were coming from all over. So the college drew from other places because it had an excellent academic reputation, which I think is really important for people to know because that never was lost completely. There were better and worse times academically for this college, but that initial push to really do an excellent job with teaching and learning never went away. So we had students from lots of places. The list is, San Francisco, Watsonville, Oakland, Berkeley, Monterey. They came from all over. But we don't really have enrollment figures, so we don't know exactly who came. We have some yearbooks, and we have a list from 1957 of the graduates from each class. So we have the graduating classes, and we can look at last names and, make some guesses more or less, although that doesn't tell us everything. Mostly they seem to be Northern European, German, Irish. There were Croatians, Anglo-Americans. There were a smattering of Italians, Portuguese, a few Hispanic students by surname. We also know that more women graduated than men. We don't know about enrollments, but we know more women graduated, which fits a pattern in higher education in the 20th century, especially the earliest 20th century. The minute any college admitted women rose to the top academically. And UC Berkeley actually saw this as a problem more than 100 years ago. And, women immediately took the top 10 spots academically. And that was
women.
Yeah, that can't have that. So we know there were large numbers of women, and we could talk more about why. There were immigrants, we know, because they had night classes, and some of those classes were what were called Americanization classes, the kinds of classes that would help people learn how to, quote, be American.
Sure, the culture, the language.
How to cook American, how to wash your baby in an American way, all of those things. Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so those things. And then there were also, it's Hollister. There were farm and ranching classes that were of interest to people who were going into those professions. So, there was a poultry class during the 1920s that drew 50 students. So
yes, later when we're talking about the airport location later in the history of Gavilan, that's where a poultry building, a poultry hatchery, was where the cosmetology program began.
Poultry was big, so were farm animals in general. And then I guess one more thing, if you're asking who came, who were the students, really important, especially for us, I think, today to understand. From the very beginning, these were not leisure class, idle, rich people who were coming to college, laying around afterwards on couches. Everybody worked.
Yeah.
A lot of them were farm kids and ranch kids who had incredibly hard lives. I mean, I think we should listen to Norma Tribino talking about growing up on the farm in South Hollister. Her parents were Italian immigrants, and they worked their tails off. They got 1 hour a night to do schoolwork, and so even though she was really bright, she was too exhausted, really. So let's listen to that. So your mother was basically a farm wife.
Yes, yes.
What did that involve?
Well, when she was here, she raised her children on the farm, and all of us worked on the farm. Before school, we had our chores, and after school, we had work to do, and after dinner, we all chipped in and took care of the farm until dark. And I think we were given about an hour, hour and a half for studies, which really wasn't enough.
Mm-mm. Did your mother can and preserve?
My mother would get up around 4 o'clock to feed my father, and then he'd come on the farm to work, and then he'd go off at 8 o'clock to work for other farmers, and my mother stayed home and did the cooking for 7 people, and sometimes the workers. And when we had apricots to harvest, we had the same family come for 30 years to help us harvest apricots. My father was good to them. We always provided things for them. And
were they an Italian family?
They were Spanish. They came at least 30 years or more.
Wow.
And my mother canned all of the fruit and vegetables that we grew. It seems to me that she would can at least 600 or 700 jars of fruit and vegetables. And in the old family home, which is next door to me now, we had a big basement, and my father made his own ham and bacon and sausage, and he canned all kinds of things in crocks. We'd have eggs and fish and all kinds of food in crocks in the basement.
Did he make his own vinegar?
No, he made his own wine, though.
Yeah, I bet he did.
It tasted like vinegar. That's why we never touched it.
But he liked it.
Oh, yes.
So so you had pigs on the farm. What other animals?
We harvested, or we from the pig we made bacon, blood sausage, all kinds of things. We had a cow that we had all kinds of milk and cream, and the extra cream we would make fresh butter, and my mother'd have me bring it to the neighbor and the fresh butter, and they'd give us eggs or some cakes or something to take home. My mother made all of our food, and besides, she worked on the farm.
It's a lot of work.
Plowing and...
Yeah, well, everybody had to. So she made pasta from scratch, bread from scratch?
Yeah. She sent us to Sunday Mass. We walked a mile to the church and back, and by the time we got home, she had a wonderful Italian meal for us, and she had fresh pasta, and she always had a roast and potatoes and vegetables. She was unreal.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, and then you're spoiled for the rest of your life. You either have to cook good food yourself or you're...
Yes.
Yeah. So which church did you walk to?
A Sacred Heart Catholic school down on College Street.
Okay.
That's more than a mile, I think.
I think it is more than a mile.
Now that we're back from hearing Norma, what might explain the larger numbers of female faculty and graduates in this time frame? Or is it really just this time frame?
Is it just this time frame?
That female graduates and faculty were more prevalent?
It would be interesting to look at a study of community colleges in general. This is a particular community. It's fairly rural. It's fairly isolated. But my guess is that it has a lot to do, with men having lots of options, women not having very many options, and this being a good option for women. This is a very good option. So, men could go straight to work, they could marry, and then they would have to support their families. If they were good scholars and if their families sacrificed or if their families could afford it, they had, open entry into the college systems in California. And nobody argued that they should stay home and cook for their parents, that. So for women, there was a lot more to overcome. Leaving home was a really big deal. We're just leaving the era, and not every family left it very fast, when women had to be chaperoned when they went anywhere. Yeah. So women couldn't move to San Jose and pursue an education unless they were from an unusual family, both, economically viable, and also the family would allow women to do this. So a local community college is an absolutely amazing chance handed to women. And from what we can see from the graduation rates, women took it. As far as the faculty, I've thought a lot about that. And that's an interesting question, because my expectation would have been the faculty would have been majority male.
Absolutely.
I think maybe what we're seeing is the phenomena where the first, second, maybe even third generation of women who've been able to go on to higher education. And by the way, from what we can see from yearbooks that tell what people majored in and where they went to college, people who were on the faculty, they all went in the West. They were all Western women, which I thought was interesting. I think this is the first generation in which there are women with master's degrees, and the community college movement is booming, as we said in the beginning. I think there are a lot of jobs, and I think given that many of the students were women, I think these progressive people hired women, and probably women worked cheaper. I mean, let's also be realistic.
All right, that makes sense.
Yeah, if you're teaching women, you also want some women teachers in the 1920s. You don't want a man teaching the health and hygiene class, God forbid. So I think those are all reasons, and I'd like to think that the people doing the hiring saw that these women could and did do a good job, and they hired them.
Washington took notice.
Yes.
I think that's great. So what kind of academic experience did the students have?
Academics seem to have been taken very seriously. From what I looked at in the 20s and 30s, they were really front and center. I mean, students had other experiences, which we'll talk about, extracurricular, but the academic credentials of the faculty, for example, were featured prominently in the yearbook, which I can't imagine anybody doing today.
Right.
They were really proud of their faculty and where they got their degree and what they got their degree in. And excellence was stressed over and over and over and over. And the yearbooks had, they're young people, and so they're having fun and they're making jokes. But in the 30s, the jokes were kind of about how well you did in class. And
yes, I noticed that. I was going through some of the yearbooks and some of the things that are in the archives in the library. And the humor was very of the time. And yes, they did kind of jab each other a little bit.
Yes, what you did in so-and-so's class and so forth. And then, I think it's also important to know that by the late 1930s, they hired a new dean, Frank Bauman, who stayed with the college through some very tumultuous years and was absolutely to be celebrated for his many contributions. But partly they hired him to teach some remediation classes. And he explicitly said, this is so you can do better in college, but this is so you can be a fully informed citizen in a democracy. They had these ideals that I think people had a sense of purpose. They were in college, not just to better themselves and get ahead, but to also be prepared to function in this country as participatory citizens.
Yeah. So they almost some of the principles of community college long before a community college was even thought of.
They had the principles down. They really saw themselves as a community. And the yearbooks kind of attest to this, too. The students had nicknames for teachers and nicknames for each other. And, it was small. Yeah. But there was a sense of we're kind of all in this together. And I think the faculty fostered that.
That's wonderful. So I would assume, along with these strict academics and excellence, that the students had some fun.
They had a lot of fun, apparently, from the yearbooks.
Yes.
It looked like fun to me anyway. So they had a student body, and I think you paid 75 cents and you got a card, and then you could come to any event that the student body put on. So in the 20s and 30s, oh my God, they were dancing all the time. They planned lots of dances. In 1 year alone, in 1930, there were 5 dances. They had a sneak day, which in my day was called a ditch day.
Oh my goodness!
Right,
Yeah,
you all just
absolutely
decide. And in fact, the sneak day looked like a heck of a lot of fun. They had 20 cars, and they all went to Rio Del Mar for a picnic.
Oh
so you can imagine this kind of cavalcade of whooping students, arms and legs hanging out the window, going to Rio Del Mar. They had proms. They had, interestingly, especially in the 30s, they had something called a hobo day.
Yes, I saw that. What was that all about?
It originated before this. So it's interesting that it lasted into the 30s, and that gives it a whole new kind of layer of meaning. But I think it was a chance for students. It's hard for us to understand today because students do whatever they want. They dress however they want now. But in those days, you had to dress. You got dressed up. You looked good. You had a tie if you were a boy and you were going to college. So this was a day when you could look like a so-called hobo. And everybody was really into it. They would tear their clothes. There's a picture in one of the yearbooks of a bunch of them looking pretty scruffy. And I think they probably just had fun. Now, by the 1930s, I'm sure there were at least some students who had family members or friends who had left in order to seek work elsewhere, and that they become hobos. They're riding the rails. They have no money. So I can't help but think that there might have been a little twinge for some of them as they put on their ripped pants, like some people very close to them may really have been living in this way. But anyway, I guess it was fun for them.
Yes. It's strange to say, but even in the 1970s, when I was in junior high, there was a hobo day.
I think there was in my junior high too. I mean, it's very, I guess, very persistent, and the stereotypes about poverty persist.
Really, and once you sort of understand some of the background, it does sort of make you wonder.
I wanted to mention one other fun thing they did, which I thought was interesting. They had theater and vaudeville, and students put on vaudeville acts. I mean, this is the 20s. So what you see out in the culture, they replicate here. And they had, in particular, a May variety frolic, and it was just for women, and the women imitated teachers. And apparently people were rolling on the floor laughing, and some male students tried to muscle their way in, and they were bounced by the female students who were guarding the door. They knew that they needed to guard the door. So I think it sounds fun.
It does sound fun, but it also sounds like they knew their audience.
Yes. They absolutely knew their audience. I just wanted to mention by the late 30s, they were very organized. They had men's students, associated women's students, a Letterman's Club, fraternities for journalism students. They had a debate team. They had a fraternity for people with high grades. There was a sorority. There was music and dance that they could join, and sports teams. And then they had more than one campus publication. They had a newspaper called the Jayseer, Jayseer, which is a kind of trick or play on JC for junior college. And then they had the yearbooks.
Which at that time was called the Rambler.
It wasn't called the Rambler till 1936. And I could talk about the 1936 yearbook. You want to talk about that?
Well, maybe I'd like to know about sports first.
Okay.
But I'd really like to know about the Rambler as well.
That Thing of Beauty, the 1936
Yes.
yearbook. Okay. Everybody had to do 2 years of PE. Men and women.
Requirement.
Yeah, men and women.
Nice.
Yes. So, and in fact, this was true into the 70s and the 80s. And then that's when, PE kind of took a nosedive, which is too bad.
Along with the arts.
Right. So for men, there were options, but this is a small college. And so frequently in the yearbooks, they would be complaining that, not enough people came out, and they didn't come out because they didn't have facilities. And they didn't have facilities because they're sharing with the high school. And the high school always took precedence. And so there are complaints like this. This is why we didn't do well. We couldn't practice because the high school students were there. So, there was a year, for example, when at the beginning of the year, we're going to have a football team. 10 guys came out. 10 guys does not a football team make.
So they were feeling the constriction of being sort of an add-on.
They hung up their helmets. They couldn't, couldn't do it. There were 5-man basketball teams, and I guess if you want to exhaust your players, you can have a 5-man basketball team, but they won't last long.
Yeah.
So men's sports tried, and one of the things that was interesting is that they would play anybody. There were local farm teams, they would play local businesses, they would play other colleges, they would play high schools, they would play anybody who walked up and said, okay, let's do a game. Yeah. So they had a lot of kind of scrimmage games, and there weren't well-organized leagues until the 1960s.
Okay. I was wondering because we play in a league and under certain rules and in modern day. And I wondered when, so 60s was when that really, it was the Wild West before that.
It was anarchy. And I think that's ironic. I think it disappointed some people because the high school had a fairly large, fairly well-supported athletic structure for men.
It was, I came from a community where it was made up of lots of little communities. And the thing that kind of tied them all together was the school system. And you were a chief supporter. So I can imagine that it would be really important to this area and bringing people together for the local sports team.
I never shared those feelings. So when people expressed that to me in Hollister, I kind of thought, so it really did matter to people. This really was what they did on Saturday night, whether or not they had a kid on the team or at the high school.
Yes.
This was local entertainment, and it was important. And they hated Gilroy, let me tell you.
Really?
Oh, man. In fact, I still, I talked to someone who shall remain nameless, who's well past 90, who expressed to me that this person never forgave the college for moving to Gilroy. And that a lot of people agree with this person. So I think it's there. Yeah,
there's still some rivalry.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So were women involved in the sports as well?
So women were taking PE, and there are lots of pictures of women doing archery and so forth. And they did seem to have lots of opportunities to be sporty. They had swimming and basketball and track and also tennis. There was a riding club that at one point half of the female student body was part of this riding club. I don't know how they managed that, where they got the horses, but it's Hollister, so people had horses. There weren't that many competitive opportunities for women. But there was an annual women's track meet by the 30s. Mm-hmm. So women could be athletic to an extent.
Yeah. Not
to the same extent that boys could be, and it wasn't as socially supported.
Right.
But for a period there, they were encouraged to be physically active for their own health.
I was going to say more for a health and long life and that kind of thing, as opposed to competitive
health, long life, and attractiveness. It's supposed to help your posture.
Yes, I have read things like that.
You're glowing from the inside, so you look so good. Those kinds of things.
Yeah, that was just good sales tools. So the 30s, the time of the Great Depression. How did that affect the area and the school in particular?
Well,
I know, big question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's good to ask about the area because rural communities really suffered for the most part during the Great Depression. And farming, unless you had a good thing going and you processed your own product or whatever, you were really at a disadvantage. So the area suffered, but the interesting thing is that I didn't really see evidence of it. We're working with young people. Young people are optimistic.
Yes.
They're looking to the future. This is what they grew up with. They didn't know any different.
Right.
This is how their parents had to scrimp and save, but there was enough. That's kind of Norma Trevino's experience. They ate well. They were on a farm. So the fact that they had no money really surprised her, So she thought that they were perfectly well off, and then her mother told her, no, we're poor, and she didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So
a testament to her mother.
Yeah, well, these parents, she had amazing parents. So it did affect the area. As far as affecting the college, it seems to have taken a while, but it's inevitable and inexorable. This kind of, it was a depression economically, but it also kind of started to eat away at the country's confidence and at people's faith in the future. So in the 1930 to 31 yearbook, there's really no evidence, even though that's a year or two after the crash.
Yeah,
they're high spirited. They have plans. They're going here or there. They're teasing each other. The 1936 yearbook, I think, is really interesting.
Yes, please tell us a little more about that.
It's a Depression era product, and so I hope I'm forgiven for having certain expectations when I opened it. They're going to be grappling with issues. And so I had to put those aside because it is an absolutely beautiful, tasteful, high-quality document. And the word that I would say most emerges from a reading of it is pride. These people had deep and genuine pride in themselves, in their college, in their community. They were very thoughtful young people. And I tell my students, we use primary documents in class so that people from the past can speak to you. It's their mind into your mind, and if you can receive that. And I have never had that experience so vividly as when looking at this yearbook. So it's got a beautiful tooled leather cover. It's in a beautiful dark blue with black. The paper is extremely high quality. It's beautifully printed. It's got overleaves of kind of a beautiful kind of spackled paper. And there are original drawings. There's some original poetry. Every word of it is carefully and well written. I mean, it's a very high quality.
Absolutely. Well, and one of the things that I thought was interesting was, even though it was the Depression, there are local businesses that supported the yearbook.
Lots of them. And they gave, most of them had, a lot of them had very small ads. The smallest ad, which was a quarter of a page, which was only an inch and a half by maybe 2 inches. Yeah. But an awful lot of them made it a priority to at least do that.
Yes.
It's an interesting document for so many reasons. I mean, here we can kind of see who was there, the Japanese-American student. They pasted real pictures into the pages.
Yes.
So they're doing this themselves, and you can even see kind of the glue stains sometimes. And they just did a beautiful job, and they gave a history of the school that really showed how proud they were of the school. These are not people who are beaten down by the Great Depression. These are people who are perky and looking ahead and thoughtful and full of life.
So 36 would have been about 18 years into the 100 years of the history. And so this is the first time the name Rambler shows up.
It is, and they explain it. Yes, we found the origin of the Rambler, which puzzled everybody, including me. I was the advisor for the student newspaper for 10 years when it was called the Rambler. So here's what they say on page 2. The name of the book, The Rambler, and its theme, Rodeo, have been chosen to give you a recollection of San Benito County, a region famous for its ranch life and fine horses. If just one reader derives some pleasure from this book, if just one reader is able to recall memories of happy times at Hollister, the staff will feel that its efforts have been rewarded.
Wow. And so, the title Rambler stayed in some form or fashion with Gavilan through the 2000s.
Into the early 2000s.
Yeah.
I'd love to bring it back.
I think it would be wonderful, yes. And one of the things that I noticed, because of the glue and kind of the carefully crafted, that when I was scanning the yearbook, sometimes I had 2 copies, thankfully, because pictures had either fallen out. In some of my the duplicate yearbooks that we had in the library, people had helped themselves to a picture or two.
Right.
And so, again, this is 18 years into the history, and it is just the college. It is no longer a shared yearbook with the high school.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of the yearbooks from the 20s, and the San Benito Historical Society, which is ground zero for anything of that nature, had 1 or 2 from the early 30s. In 1 year, they shared it.
Yes.
I don't know if that had been the past practice or if this is the first time they did a yearbook. I have no information about that.
Well, we have at least one of those, I think maybe both of those, in the Gavilan archives in the library.
They were very clever. They made one book, but the first half was the high school, and then you turned it over and opened it on the other end, and it was the college.
Yes.
So they were clearly distinct from each other, but they saved some money that way.
Yeah, definitely.
I've just found Hobo Day, the picture from Hobo Day, where the guys are wearing kind of funny hats, and the women all have their hair in braids, and people have kind of big, oversized, torn things that they're wearing. It doesn't say that it's Hobo Day, but this is not how these people dressed.
Right.
So,
I also noticed that there are no captions for the pictures.
yeah, I think they really expected that, you were there and you knew, who that was. Actually, some of them do. Some of them named the people in the pictures, which is more than we have in the 1951 yearbook. I did kind of a comparison.
Yes.
Yeah, but this one, they are trying to.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's notable about this is for the graduates, they also tell you where each came from and what they've been involved with at the college, and, quite a lot, and then where they're going from here.
Again, an investment in the students, an investment in their future.
I have to say, I really bonded with the class of 1936. There were 20 graduates. 16 of them went on to higher education, which I think is a remarkable testimony to the love of learning and, the desire to have a future that was instilled or that they already came having. I don't know which.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's kind of what I had for my questions today. Was there anything else you wanted to tell us about this in-between time, this 20s and 30s time period?
Yes, I haven't really answered your question about the Great Depression. I said it kind of started slowly. It took its toll, and students diminished through the 30s. The population at the school diminished, and as it lost enrollment, then it also, I think, from kind of what I've seen, just some small hints, kind of lost that sense of itself, of being such a great place. And by the late 30s, there's definitely a sense of just trying to struggle through. The war is threatening, and the Depression deepened, and I think it probably became harder, and I think it probably became harder for people to focus on college. So there's definitely a downturn and a dip.
Yeah. Now, so 30s, so that would have been as the storm clouds were gathering, is I think the way they were putting it in Europe, and in America we were struggling as to whether or not we were going to, some people were calling to enter the war, some people were not. And the West Coast, of course, being sort of different maybe than politically from the rest of the country. Was that impacting the people here at all?
California kind of opted out of the New Deal. There was a governor in California who was hostile to Roosevelt and the New Deal. So California didn't get much New Deal help. The CCC,
Really?
the Civilian Conservation Corps, the WPA did a little work here.
Yeah, I was going to say the WPA.
But for the most part, California rejected a lot of New Deal help.
Wow.
Which was just a reflection of, a Republican governor who wanted to make
Right.
Roosevelt look bad. But, for Hollister, Gilroy, Morgan Hill, these agricultural areas, the Depression didn't end until the war saved them.
Yeah.
And that's not going to happen till 39, 40, 41.
Yeah.
And so things went pretty far downhill from what I can tell locally. It was a hard time.
Well, thank you so much for bringing us into the 30s with the history. Next time we'll be talking about World War II and the impact on the area and the students of Gavilan College. Please join us next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.